This is To the Point with Michael Williams.
Good morning. Early voting is getting underway this week. Mail-in votes have already been pouring into election offices. Now just 16 days until Election Day. What do polls say about the presidential race in Florida? My first guest, Dr. Kevin Wagner, professor and chair of Florida Atlantic University's Political Science Department. FAU does its own polling surveys, and Dr. Wagner keeps an eye on all of them.
The polls are telling us that it's going to be very close. We've been polling this since May. Others in Florida have been polling it as well. There isn't a huge movement. One of the amazing things about this race, or the consistent things about this race, is the numbers don't move a whole lot. In our most recent poll, we had Mr. Biden up by about 4 points, just outside the margin of error. But generally speaking, we've had this thing pretty close. I think it's going to be close until Election Day, and I think it's going to be a tight race no matter who wins.
We're looking at early mail-in ballots. Early voting begins in a few days. What is the sense about the intensity of each side's supporters? It's one thing to say, I have a feeling that I like them better. It's another thing to actually turn that into a vote. Are you able to discern that?
Yeah, there are, pollsters will measure intensity, and throughout the year, one of the things that Trump supporters have shown is a higher intensity rate than we've seen with Biden supporters. In the most recent polls, however, that seems to be narrowing, if not dissipated altogether. The truth of the matter is that both sides are actually quite energized to vote in this election, and you can see it already in the volume of early voting. There is a difference, though, in that the supporters of the president tend to be much more likely to be in person and Election Day voters, while you're seeing a lot more of the intensity of the Democrats show up in mail-in voting.
How do you look at different voting blocs? The 65 and older vote was crucial to President Trump, now President Trump's fortunes in 2016. There's been some argument that Biden's really eaten into that lead with older voters in Florida. Let's talk about that demographic first, the most reliable voting bloc in the state. Where do you stand in terms of the polling and what you're seeing there?
Yeah, so the senior voters is actually a very interesting element in Florida. The senior voters are very high propensity voters. They're the kinds of voters that can shift an election. And in 2016, that was the demographic that Donald Trump did particularly well in. One of the things that we've noted in our polling and similar polling around the state is that those numbers have narrowed. And in fact, some of the polling suggests that Joe Biden is actually doing better with senior voters than Donald Trump is. I'm not 100% convinced that that's the case yet, but what I do think is pretty clear is that that's a much more competitive race for senior voters, and whoever wins that might well be the person that wins Florida. That's how important a demographic that is for Florida.
The Hispanic vote, ever growing in Florida. I believe it's between 1 out of 5, 1 out of 4 registered voters now Hispanic. There's been an argument all summer long that the Biden camp's not done as much to try and corral part of that Hispanic vote, and that the president, on the other hand, has done very well in terms of courting the Hispanic vote. Where does that stand in terms of what you see in the numbers?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I think part of the problem is that unless you do a vote directly of Hispanic voters, what you're looking at is a subsample of larger population votes, in other words, of Florida or nationally, and the number of Hispanic voters in those polls is smaller, so that the movement in those can seem a lot larger than it might be in real life. With that said, there is some evidence the president is doing better with Hispanic voters than he did in 2016. That's not too surprising because his numbers were pretty grim with Hispanic voters in 2016. But I think it's also important to remember that Hispanic voters do not vote as a bloc, that Cuban American voters are different than Puerto Rican voters, and you're going to see a lot of differences across the spectrum on Hispanic voters. The question really isn't who's going to do well with them. The question is who's going to do well with those voters that are supporting that candidate. And I think both candidates have an opportunity with those voters, with a broader group. But I think it's much more complex than just thinking about them as sort of one large group.
By the way, Dr. Wagner, I just have to say, I know you have a nice office, but that, by the way, that bookshelf is superimposed. There's no way his office is that big, but very impressive nonetheless. At any rate, back to a serious topic. The youth vote, always the critique that very enthusiastic, but somehow does not translate into getting out and voting. What do you see there?
Yeah, that one's going to be hard to predict. I do think, generally speaking, the one thing we're seeing is that there's a much higher rate of voting across the board in just about every demographic group. And I expect that will hold true for youth voters as well. The problem, though, is youth vote going to be a larger proportion of the actual election? And that's much harder to know because obviously older voters are turning out in higher numbers as well. The big problem, the one thing that we've always seen is that younger voters tend to trail other groups in voting. There have been some exceptions. Barack Obama did very well with youth voters. Hillary Clinton did not do as well. So the question is whether or not Joe Biden will split the difference, or will he have a number similar to Barack Obama. Hard to know at this point. There's some evidence that the youth vote is excited in some areas. There's also some evidence that it's not. So we might just have to wait and see what that looks like on by election day.
And the intensity and turnout of the African American vote, so crucial to Biden's fortunes both here and nationally.
Yeah, so far the numbers suggest that Biden is actually doing very well with African American voters, and we expect those numbers to continue. The Democratic candidate for president usually does well, but the question really isn't who's going to win African Americans, it's whether or not a large enough portion of African Americans are going to come out that can help elevate the ticket. And that's one place where Hillary Clinton had trouble. She obviously won African American votes, but she didn't have the enthusiasm, the numbers that Barack Obama did. And I'm sure one of the things that Joe Biden is going to try with the help of former President Obama is to try and rally African American vote up and try and match those numbers that Obama saw in 2008 and 2012. And that, that could make a big difference, especially in very close states like Florida.
Dr. Wagner, we only have about 30 seconds left. What are the top and bottom lines from your expertise, your polling, that you really want all of us to key on, both in the early voting and on election night? What do we need to be watching for most closely?
Yeah, turnout. You want to see the volume of voters they're turning out from. In Florida, if Democrats are going to win, you want to look at the turnout numbers in Miami-Dade, Palm Beach, and Broward. For Republicans, you want to look at the northern part of the state, especially the Panhandle, and see what the turnout is looking like there. Not too many people are being persuaded in this election. So the election really is about motivating voters to turn out. And just one caveat for the voters out there: if you're going to vote early, if you're going to vote by mail, make sure you follow the directions. Make sure you sign your envelope. Make sure you get it in early. There's going to be a high volume of early voting, and if you want your vote to count, it's important that you follow the directions and you get it in early.
My next guest, Patrick Franklin, President and CEO of the Urban League of Palm Beach County, as we look at get out the vote efforts in the 2+ weeks left until Election Day.
Michael, we have been very active this past season, election season. We were active with multiple get out the vote registration drives. Right now, our concentration is all about get out the vote. We're going to have a massive free ride to the polls, starting on the first day of early voting, October 19th through November 1st. Anybody throughout the county that wants to ride to the polls, we will have that available. You will get all the information. Will be out to the public, and we look forward to a big turnout. I think this will be the biggest election ever.
How did voter registration go? I know you all were very intensely involved in that. So you have the voter registration now leads to getting people to the polls. How'd that look?
Voter registration was interesting because you had to go through quite a few people to register one person. So I think a lot of people were engaged. They registered early on. They participated in the primary. And I think that for the most part, people are anxious to get their vote done. I see it as far as the early voting with the lines that are happening right now at the Supervisor of Elections office with the mail-in ballot. There are actually people lining up to drop off their ballots.
What is your sense of how many people you'll be able to get to the polls with the process you've set up?
I'm hoping that we will get to probably, 5,000 to 10,000 people probably.
Wow.
We're going to cover the whole entire county. We're going to have a bus running in the Belglade area on the weekends, the 2 early voting weekends, and on election day. And I'm just really thrilled with the team of people that are working with us throughout the county that are providing sites. We're looking for a robust number of volunteers to join us. And we're going to have our arms welcome to anybody. We just want you to get on the bus. We will take you to the early voting sites, the 18 sites around the county, and practice your right to vote.
What is your concern headed for Election Day? So much has been made of it about the sanctity and security of the vote. What are your thoughts, concerns, and what are you hearing, and what are others saying to you?
I think that our voting process is the best ever. I think that our supervisor of election, Wendy Link, has done a great job preparing this county and her team to vote. And I think the shenanigans that you're hearing back and forth and the doubts and everything, I think that's just a smokescreen. I think people should be not afraid to practice their right to vote. I think they should go out in a vengeance and cast their votes. Don't let anything stop you from voting. I think our process is secure, and I'm hopeful that we will have a great election without any interference. And I just wish those who had doubt would put more time and effort into making sure that it worked properly.
There's a lot about voter preference, but of course, I was talking to the guest just before you. Voter intensity is the people actually take their preference and go do something about it and vote. Your sense of that seems to be you feel pretty good there.
I feel excellent. From what I'm hearing on the ground from different people, many people are waiting to vote. I'm really telling people, make sure that you vote as early as you can. If it's by mail, have a plan to vote and exercise your right to vote by mail, by early voting, and or election day. But like anything, Michael, we're not guaranteed to be here on November 3rd. So cast your ballot as early as possible.
Let me ask you, your sense as we talk about it, so much of what's happening here, and it's such a big area here. What are the primary communities you serve? Largely underserved communities are your typical focus, sir?
We're going to concentrate in Riviera Beach, West Palm Beach, downtown, the Coleman Park, Pleasant City area, Northwest communities. We're going to concentrate in the Belglade, South Bay, Pahokee, Belglade area. We're going to concentrate in the Delray Beach area, in the Boynton Beach area. All those heavily located minority sections that are sometimes overlooked, that's where we're going to be. That's where we're going to be focused in to assist those. We're going to have ballots, not ballots. We're going to have sample ballots on the buses for you to take a look at. We're going to have refreshments and just whatever you need to make sure that you feel comfortable. We're nonpartisan, and our goal is to make sure that we can help you get to the polls and assist you in any way that we can.
Mr. Franklin, what are the issues, as you hear it from people that the Urban League serves, that you think are the drivers of people saying, I'm going to get out and vote? What are the kinds of things driving their decision and desire to make sure their voice is heard?
Well, Michael, we're in the middle of a global pandemic, and many people, especially people of color, have suffered immensely to the point of the death rate amongst our Black community is 2.5 times the rate of anybody else. And with the COVID going on, the botched issues of how we're able to protect ourselves, and we haven't gotten any better than we have from the very beginning. And we as a country need a change right now. So people are looking for a change. They're looking for new leadership, and not only at the president level, Michael, they're looking for new leadership all down the ballot. They're looking for people that have their interests in heart. Healthcare is another issue. People need healthcare. They need insurance. And for right now, if that's going to go away, we're going to see a big drive for people to say, no, I want to keep my insurance. So when you look at the health issues, you look at the economic issues with employment going sky high, the Black unemployment rate is in double digits. Where? Somewhere above 15 maybe. But we need to make sure that people are looking for a change. When you look at health and employment, that's the two biggest drivers.
And next up, our roundtable looks at the final push by President Trump and Joe Biden to win battleground Florida.